I'm happy to next introduce a panel of really competent, exciting, successful startup founders, and Kate, who is incredible, who is a great advocate for startups as the executive director of Engine Advocacy. So thank you so much for sticking with us this far. Come on up. I don't know. Yeah, just come here. So it's yours now. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Here you go.
Thank you. Can folks hear me? Are we doing all right here? Okay. So I actually didn't tell Austin this, but all of the questions have been generated by GPT-3. So it's get ready for some wacky things here. But I am so excited to be speaking with you all here. I think we've heard a little bit from folks on the Hill, but now we're going to hear a bit from people in the trenches and people in the weeds working with this every single day. And so, because who does not love a good starter story, the plan here is to kick off by having folks introduce themselves and talk about the path that they've taken into entrepreneurship and AI. So without further ado here, we're going to kick off with Thomas in the corner there. So Thomas is the co-founder and CEO of Prove, a SaaS software company focused on AI, blockchain, and biometrics. He was previously the CEO of TD&P Consulting and has served as counsel to the U.S. House Committee on Small Business. Thomas, what is your starting story?
So I'll say that I say first of all, thank you. I hope I have lots of time to tell this story. I feel as though I'm a little bit older than most of the folks who get into this. And I'm really a theorist of sorts and an economist of sorts. And so I came to this area sort of through the back door, building models, thinking about how to predict events, that kind of thing, the way they used to do things in the old days by hand. And they still do it the right way. But my story here is a little bit different. My story is about an AI firm really entrenched in sort of neural network and very much trying to build and create in a space where there aren't a lot of folks like us, like me, I should say, and really being able to convince people that we've got a talented team of diverse individuals from all different backgrounds, but convincing people that you can have serious thought by people who are looking at serious problems in this space who are of color. And that has been probably the biggest challenge that I have seen in my growth story, really being able to explain that story over and over again, whether or not you're talking to a family office. If you don't know about it now, you will. Or whether or not you're talking to your typical accelerator or something like that, really helping them understand, look, we understand this space, we're serious thinkers, deep involvement, and that's the story. And so today we're here so we can explore that a little bit more. I won't talk too much more about it, but I will tell you that this problem about, it didn't just begin with George Floyd, I realized, but I do have a lot of friends now who paid attention to the work that we do because of it, and that's kind of sad. So we're here like the rest of you to solve real problems that this country is facing. I think the congressman spoke a bit about that, about dealing with some of these issues, particularly China, and what they've done in the space in terms of AI. My company is focused on AI, specifically Prove, in the space of identity, remote identity. We've come up with a couple of things that we believe are unique in the space, and I'll talk about that later. But let me pass the mic on, and that's the story.
All right, thank you. Next, I want to turn it over to Kate. So Kate is currently the director of Engine Advocacy. And Engine Advocacy is a policy advocacy organization supporting entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship policies on encryption, AI, and more. I'm sure she will explain that much better than I can as well. And before joining Engine, she worked on surveillance reform at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So Kate, what is your starting story?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And I always like to preface these conversations by saying I don't build anything cool or innovative. I just get to talk to people who do all day. And that's the best part of the job and the best part of Engine. So Engine, for anyone who's not familiar, we're a nonprofit. We're based here in DC. And we work with thousands of startups across the country. We're big believers that if you have a good idea and a good connection to the internet, no matter who you are or where you are or what you look like, you should have the opportunity to succeed. And so we try to work with folks here in DC to advance policies that make that a reality. AI is a great place for us to focus in on because especially here in DC, I think it's easy to think that all tech issues are Facebook issues or Google issues or you name it. But that's not who we talk to every day. We talk to like 2-person, 10-person, I would say mom and pop, but they tend not to be mothers and fathers, married couples like that, small startups that are trying to hit the ground running, doing cool, innovative things that make life better kind of across the board. And it's really important for policymakers to be thinking about those folks, not just kind of the concerns about the biggest players. And so, yeah, that's what I do at Engine. We try to tell the story of startups, and that can take kind of there's a wide range of stories to tell there, but I think AI is one place that's especially exciting right now.
Okay. And to now turn it over to Joseph Nelson, who is the co-founder and CEO of RoboFlow, an organization that builds computer vision tools for developers, used by over 50,000 developers and over half the Fortune 100. They've also raised over $20 million from the likes of Y Combinator, Craft Ventures, and more. And previously co-founded an organization called Represently, building natural language processing tools for Congress. And I promised to give a positive intro if he gave me free RoboFlow credits, so don't trust any of it. But Joseph, what is your starting story?
Thanks. Pleasure to be here. So in AI generally, I kind of like to make this joke that I studied economics in school, not sort of your generic computer science background. And the deeper I got into economics, the more I realized that it's usually using equations to describe some real-world thing, and probably inappropriately so, but directionally correct. Like, for example, like if we build more houses, rent should generally go down. Unless you're in San Francisco, people disagree with that, but generally true. And the deeper I got into that, I realized, this is actually probably just building models and statistical representations of the world. And so then I kind of got one step deeper, and I was like, okay, well, if we're just building models, why not get it more hands-on, write some of the code, identify ways to better model and describe the world. And pretty soon I was, deep in the world of what people consider to be machine learning land, and basically rebranded econometrics. And from there, I don't know, I kind of caught the bug. I figured that this is probably the most important technological shift that's going to happen in my lifetime. And if we can enable machine learning in many forms to be in the hands of all industries and developers, we get to live in a much more exciting future. And so Leo had mentioned that the last company that I built was one called Represently. We used natural language processing to improve how quickly offices responded to the constituent mail they receive annually. And so this is probably a problem that many of us are familiar with in DC, but the House of Representatives gets about 40 million messages a year, 91% of which are digital, and there's not really any sense of intelligent sorting for those messages. Maybe I should asterisk that. Interns are very intelligent. But interns can have higher leverage applications if robots are sorting things for them. And I like to joke that AI actually just stands for Army of Interns at the end of the day. If there's like an intern task that can be solved, AI is probably a good, well-suited thing for that problem. And we built this company that kind of plugged into the tools that you use on the Hill, like Fireside 21 and some of these other products. And then Fireside 21 acquired that company in 2018. And I kind of bumbled around a bit, figuring out what we were going to work on next. And that's when a friend and I started RoboFlow. And we build computer vision technologies, as Leo mentioned. So things like self-checkout systems or technologies that accelerate cancer research, from faster counting of mitochondria and things like that, which are the powerhouse of the cell, if you're not familiar. And the other sorts of technologies of manufacturing quality assurance, anything along the lines of, if there's a visual inspection that needs to happen, computer vision can probably enhance and enrich that experience. And as Leo mentioned, we're pretty young in our organization. We're 12 people. We're VC-backed, but we're convinced that if we can enable more folks to use the technologies that make the world more interactive, more engaging, and as humans, the most predominant input we use to interpret the world is our sense of sight. If we enable software to have a similar sense of sight, the world becomes a much more exciting and interactive place to live in. So that's a bit about my background and what I'm working on now.
Well, thank you, Joseph. And so to that last point you made of describing AI as an army of interns, first of all, I'm absolutely going to adopt that immediately. But I am curious for the group here, when you think about AI maybe having meaning outside of an intern, what does AI mean to you? And so I'm going to kick it over to Thomas here. What does AI mean to you?
Well, I can tell you what inspires me. So I have some thoughts here. I put on glasses, but then that would be like revealing my age. I'm not doing that today, okay? Maybe the gray hair will do it. But anyway, one of the things I really wanted to focus in on, and I didn't want to forget, that's why I kind of wrote this down, is that to me, AI really creates this possibility of bridging the class divide. And that's extraordinarily important to me because there is a class divide. People like to talk about a digital divide, but there's a class divide. And it's not just here in this country, it's around the world. And I see it as an opportunity to really sort of focus in on that issue. And so when I think about the journey of proof, systems are proved, as we say at home, and I say home, nobody's at home, everybody's everywhere. But what I say is this. We began saying to ourselves, what does AI mean, not just for dealing with the problems we think about generally about AI, counting things and the like, but what does it mean in terms of people? And the first thing it means is identity. And if you want to bridge the gap between classes, you have to somehow level the playing field. And unfortunately, when we think about accessing the online world or the online community, everybody doesn't have the same level of access. And they don't have the same level of access in terms of having a computer. They don't have the same level of access in terms of being able to even identify each other. And so when you think about a world in which there's zero trust, and then people beginning to identify each other online, supposedly through very simple identification methods, but I won't say bad things. There are people who we know have a very difficult time being recognized. For instance, people of color all around the world are not somehow able to be recognized as easily as persons who happen to be white. And the question is, why is that? And one of the things I learned a long time ago from my really good friend, who's our CTO, is that, yes, the resources weren't necessarily put in those spaces. People say the problem is a little bit too hard to solve. But then you got a little company like mine that's been around for I don't know how long. We dumped all of our personal money into addressing that problem. That's before it became popular and it came out. And people weren't really interested in that problem, but they were once COVID hit. It really got a lot of interest at that point. And so, this is when we started getting to this question about, sort of how do you deal with, neural networks? Thinking about it, wrapping that question or thinking about that question around facial recognition or biometrics in general, but facial recognition, it became a really interesting problem to solve. And then we began thinking about how do you do, once you begin getting really good responses and you tweak and you work around it, and once you start really being able to recognize individuals, we use like 120 plus nodes on the face, and we do a lot of really interesting things is what I'm trying to say. I'm trying not to nerd myself down. But the more important thing is once you've done that and you're able to recognize people, then in this world where we say that, we're not going back to work in general, how do you successfully identify folks, self-authenticate? And so we began to look at that question and thought about it hard, came up with some really good solutions. And this is the reason why we said, okay, let's do this. Let's enter the market this way. We created a bunch of things because, nerds in the room create things. That's what you do. We come up with ideas and we create things. That's what we do. None of it necessarily has any implication for the real world, but we always think it does. And I'm taking a little bit of time here because I want to say just another thing. So we said, okay, e-signature is the thing that people are interested in. People need to go to work. They need to sign. They need to do business. But again, I get back to my original theme. How do you overcome the class divide? If people are at home and they can't do business or they can't go to a bank or they can't, or they're not trusted because they're trying to start a home business, how do you deal with that? And so our goal was to solve that problem, and we did. And we solved that problem by enabling people to remotely self-authenticate, broadly speaking, across all communities, white, Asian, African American, Afro-Caribbean, across all communities, successfully at rates. We tweaked it a little bit more. I want to get my 9. We have 99.9, 99.8. I don't. Whatever it is. We're still working on it. We're tweaking. But the point is, folks can now sign contracts. Folks can now identify their, label their NFTs if they want with their identity. They can do just about anything. Again, we entered the market this way. And we can do it remotely, and people are interested in it. But guess where we went first to begin talking about this as an African-American company? We went to our HBCUs. and we began talking to them about how can we begin to integrate as an option for them. How can we begin helping them use a solution that's going to help them now identify their students during this COVID world and potentially post-COVID. And frankly, if you think about it, my background is in healthcare, economics, and that kind of thing. This is not the last time. We know that within the next 6 to 7 years, we're going to be experiencing another wave of something. But business will need to go on. And so leveling the playing field in terms of all people being able to participate in this economy really means looking at the serious questions like this and opening up the virtual world to all people. Because in a zero trust environment, we have to get beyond that in order for all folks to benefit.
Thank you. So I think moving now to someone who is not necessarily building, but looking to enable folks like Thomas and to support folks like Thomas who are entering this market and leveraging advanced technology to do so. So I'm curious, Kate, when you think about AI, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think kind of building off of Joseph's point about Army of Interns, AI is about making life easier, and right, we want to be encouraging that. We want to be encouraging innovation that makes life easier, and to do that, we really need to get past some of the cliches and some of the fear mongering around AI. It's not all killer robots. In fact, we don't work with any companies who make killer robots. In case I need to say that. It's really innocuous, everyday ways to build in technology to make life easier and better for people, across their communities and ideally across the world. And I've been in the tech space for 10 years now. 10 years ago, we were all talking about big data. 6 years ago, it was all IoT, right? And those phases, they come in, then they fall out, and we just kind of accept that, this is just part of the technology world now. We understand that big data doesn't have to be a scary thing. It can be something that we use to make the world better. And I'm hopeful that AI can move to that place too, where everyday users and startups, right, are already in that space. They're already innovating. They're already doing cool, beneficial things. We just need to get users and policymakers up to that speed so that we can be talking about something that, again, people across the country, you can have a really innovative idea no matter where you are, what you look like. And if we can incentivize those people to build those products and remove barriers that keep them from building those products, we can all benefit. So I'm hopeful that's kind of what AI is starting to mean, and we can all play a role in pushing it there.
Okay. And now, Joseph, turning it over to you here. What does AI mean to you?
Can I just say Army of Interns? No, I mean I'll give
It's got to be more. It's got to be more.
color.
Tiny bit more.
I think the Wikipedia textbook sort of definition is quite good of interdisciplinary field that leverages human intelligence for making some amount of automated decisions. I think it's a pretty good anchoring point. But I think what it means to me and why it's I made the claim earlier, I think it's the biggest technological improvement that will happen in my lifetime and why I'm dedicated to working on that set of problems. I think what it really means is it allows humans to focus on more creative, more interesting, more exciting parts of work, whether that's creative work or things that require a bit more engaged, that actually utilize our intellect. In a lot of senses, I think the reason we can talk both about why that happens and kind of the implications of that. I think some of the implications of that, folks immediately kind of worry about displacement of capability or displacement of responses. I'm sure that's something we'll talk about in greater depth. But on the other hand, it's a market creating opportunity of all the different ways in which not just that we need machine learning engineers or folks to create labeled data, but in the same way that we couldn't anticipate the internet would create whole new industries, I think the same thing is true for machine learning broadly. I think I recently read To Sell is Human, and there was a claim in there that 1 in 9 Americans worked in sales in the 60s, and a lot of that was door-to-door sales. And when the internet came around, everyone's oh, sales is done for. Why do you need to do sales if people can just go self-service and purchase things directly online, going to www or going to Amazon or things like that? Bureau of Labor Statistics, to this day, 1 in 9 Americans still work in a sales-related profession. And so I think a lot of the times, the things that AI can do for us is it creates a ability for humans to focus on more interesting things, to create a sense of equity, I think, in terms of the types of work that people get to work on. I think that warrants the importance of kind of the discussion, a lot of what today is, of investing in education and programs so everyone can partake in the future of the AI economy. But broadly, I think it's a shift in how software and technology is built. And I'm really excited to be working on something that allows that shift to happen more quickly.
Okay. And now I want to open it up to be a tiny bit more freeform here, and so feel free to kind of talk. I would love for you all to speak with each other about this. So we're now in a room for the launch of SeedAI here, and we're now thinking about how an organization like this one that has roots in DC, in politics, in startups, in advocacy, can really help. And so I'm curious for you all, what are you looking for an organization like this to do?
Well, I'll jump
Yeah,
in
so
maybe
think
because
first.
yeah, sure. Well, one, I would say work with Engine. I think there's a lot of overlap here, and just to, like I said, tell the story of how AI is out there helping people every day. There's a lot of places where policymakers can get engaged to address a lot of the points we've already talked about, right? The workforce issue. AI workforce is going to be a huge need going forward. The number one thing we hear from startups is access to capital, but the number two thing we hear is access to talent. There is already a really dramatic shortage of STEM-educated folks who want to jump in and join the Omaha startup or join the Atlanta startup, right? They're already struggling to fill those roles. The government can take actions now to make sure those workforce needs are met moving forward, including on AI. And that's, right, not only can they do that, they can do it in a way that's diverse and equitable, and that's, I think, should be a number one priority. And so I hope SeedAI can kind of take on the role of advancing those thoughts early and often, because sometimes we get to the problem too late. We get to the problem when it's already a really big problem, and I really worry that could happen here. There are startups everywhere, like the two you've heard about, building cool things, and we need to be really proactive about making sure that just gets easier to do.
I'll go ahead. I have a lot to say about this, but then I'm not going to say a lot this time. I do tend to speak too much. Hill days. But there's something that we all know very well, and you said it. You already hit on it. It's sort of STEM. There's so much talent in this country that's sort of overlooked, and that's what I think that SeedAI really can offer here. There's so much talent. I don't know if it's overlooked, as in, myself, I have to shift my thinking away from the universe of educators and schools and the like, and realize that there are other places where there's talent, but it needs to be taught. For instance, I talk to my colleagues, and one of the things we're talking to HBCUs, and I went to an HBCU, Morehouse, but my options were between my parents, go to Princeton or Morehouse, choose. And my dad was like, no, you're going to Morehouse. Okay, so I went to Morehouse. But most folks are not in that position. Most folks are going to everyday schools in everyday communities, but they're talented people, and it's a function of access. So driving resources in those directions, that makes the most sense to me. And that's what I think that Seed really should, continue to focus on, pointing people's attention to this wide array of individuals out there. I think we all talked a couple of times, and one of the things that was said, when you look at the number of, China has a lot of people, and proportionally, they just do. So they're going to have a certain number of geniuses. Geniuses, 2%. We talked about it the other day. I think that was you who really drove that home, and you probably should talk about it more, but I'll take your thunder a little bit. So you think about it. The U.S. has how many adults? About 180 million adults, right? And 2% of those are probably geniuses of some sort. And that's great. But so those people are everywhere in this country. Math is the great equalizer. Logic is the great equalizer. Everybody can do math. It doesn't matter if you don't speak well or haven't been greatly educated, but everybody can learn math. And so, or learn logic. Everybody can do that. So we really need, STEM is about that, but we really need to push people in STEM fields, and more importantly, put AI training and blockchain training in the hands of young people today. Really get it out there, and that's the focus. That's what I see as being the driving mission.
So I think, I feel like we could have that conversation for an hour, and I would love to. That's something we hear from startups all the time about the leaky STEM pipeline and the lack of, kind of diversity in decision makers and how that trickles down and how even educators aren't always, proactive about pushing people in. But one thing that I think is maybe outside of the policy space that groups like SeedAI can be especially helpful at is building the connective tissue between startups. We hear all the time, especially from underrepresented founders, so founders who are black, founders who are women, founders in areas of the country where you don't have Silicon Valley. We hear all the time, we know other people are doing good things. We would probably have a lot to learn from them, but we're busy running our 4-person shop. Like, we don't have time to go out and meet everyone. And Engine, unfortunately, doesn't have time to go out and meet everyone either, although we try. And I think if SeedAI can fill that role and kind of connect folks who are smart and working on similar things, and right, in this space, there's so little, it's collaboration, not competition, right? Startups, even that should be competing and are competing in the market, aren't competing on ideas. They want to help each other and they want to build things together, and that's one of the best parts about the startup ecosystem. And so finding ways to build that connective tissue, so somebody doing something like in Atlanta can talk to someone doing something in Omaha, and they can build together. And I think that's sorely missing, and hopefully something this group can do.
I think you both hit on this. I think one of the reasons I was really excited to be a part of today's conversation and support Austin and SeedAI generally is I think there's a dearth of understanding of the what, why, and how behind artificial intelligence, especially among policymakers that are making decisions. I mean, even technologies like Facebook, which been around for a decade plus, are still not terribly well understood by those that are writing the laws to regulate them. And artificial intelligence and machine learning broadly is kind of like the next evolution of a lot of the technological principles that are being underpinned. So I think it's been extremely encouraging that you have the representation from folks on the Hill as a part of today's event. And that props to Austin, honestly, for being in the position where he's leading government relations at a company like NVIDIA and saying, the next most important thing I can spend my time on is creating a level of education and connectivity between policymakers and those that are on the ground building. And I think that takes a lot of, one, self-confidence to start something completely new, and two, a really strong realignment on the mission and purpose. And I found that to be incredibly compelling and inspiring. And the second thing that I'm really excited about with SeedAI is the conversation we were having previously about investment in equity. What's really awesome about investing in places to create greater STEM access or educational programs is you can do that in places that come from underrepresented communities, come from places that are less well served, and if you connect that to a lot of the overlap that happens with congressional members and representation, I think there's actually a huge incentive for districts that might not be in the few zip codes that receive 50% of VC every single year. And I think it's kind of a unique sweet spot to be in, is to say, hey, this technological wave is happening. Your district and the position that you're in might be in a place where it's in a zip code that is overlooked for these sorts of capabilities. This is an easy place to both put US competitiveness out ahead and invest in the future of communities that might otherwise be overlooked. Our company is actually headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa. That's where I'm from. One of the other reasons, I was going to say the last reason I'm excited about SeedAI is the agriculture overlap in the name. It's the way that I was joking with Austin. I was like, it's really, really good. Germinating ideas, cultivating new things, a field of opportunities of things that can happen from SeedAI. And so cultivating conversations like this and continuing to have really strong thoughts, Austin's outstanding in this field, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Can I add on quickly? Not to detract from Austin, because he's great, and he knows that. But I think something that we often say at Engine is, and for any policymaker staff in the audience, you have a startup in your district. You probably have several startups in your district. You just haven't found them yet. People think, rural communities, underserved communities, they don't have innovators, but they do. They're just not the ones that kind of the media and pop culture is putting in your face. And I think we will very soon hit a point where we can say credibly, you have an AI startup in your district. That's going to become so pervasive that will be true. And we certainly try to find them early and promote them often, and I hope SeedAI does the same. But I also think it's on staff to be looking for those stories in your home states and districts, because that's where it's happening. We spend so much time talking about Silicon Valley. Certainly we work with companies there too, but this is happening everywhere, and it really would behoove, I think, everyone to start proactively looking for it.
And I'd like to say something else too. And I don't think that there's an intentional need to we're not trying to put money in this community or that community. I just think there are habits of behavior that people have had for a very long time. I've met tons of people doing this work, good people, really focused on helping or getting to the startups or helping to build infrastructure, which is a different question altogether, because that controls a lot about what's happening. But most folks are good minds and thoughtful. They don't have the minds of some of the younger people where they're actively engaged in changing their old patterns of thought or they have new patterns of thought, and reaching out in different ways. And so I feel like me being sort of in the middle of the older generation with lots of capital and the younger generation with not lots of capital is that I can see both sides and try to help them bridge that gap. And so I also believe that, SeedAI has that role of helping to bridge that gap between younger people and how they think about the world and how to reach out. And older folks who are not really thinking poorly, it's just they've been doing the same thing for 50 years. So we've got to bridge that. You guys have got to bridge that, and I think you're doing it. It's a great job. Great job. Great work. Awesome. Okay.
Amazing. Well, one thing, and I think in a similar fashion, would love for you all to discuss amongst yourself around this, that I'm curious is, if you were to forward project out, let's say, 10 years from now, and everyone knows about SeedAI because it's done just such unbelievably incredible work, what does that look like to you? Like, I think this is obviously the room of folks who are in a position to make that change happen, and this is the room of folks to make that ask too. So I'm curious, if SeedAI were to hit that ideal in your mind, what would it have done over these next 10 years?
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm going to sound crazy, but I don't mind that. I'm at that point. So, first of all, I believe that if SeedAI has truly done its job right, and I think it will, by the way, we won't begin to think of technology or computing technology as being something distinct and separate from ourselves. And let me explain what I mean by that. That it should be natural in our lives and our thinking. And I'll give the best example right now. It should be seamless at some point. There's no reason that an individual should be at home sitting at their computer, get up, from my perspective, and then have to go to the bank to do the very same thing so a guy can put the information in the computer. But that doesn't make any sense at all about themselves. It doesn't make any sense at all. So from my perspective, I see SeedAI as making people feel comfortable and creating environments where technology can be developed so that people comfortably interact with the technology in a way that they're just not thinking about it anymore. It's kind of like how the phone, at some point, we should see particularly AI as being creating a natural environment for that kind of communication. I don't know if I said anything, but yeah, I tried my best.
Actually, just a quick thing that I want to say there is that word that you chose, comfort, I think is really interesting and a really powerful one, because I think I'm going to plug the survey that you all had real quick of, clearly it's not something folks are comfortable with right now. We're not there in that, to what you mentioned, Kate, about that level of comfortability with big data, which may also not entirely exist just yet. But it's definitely not there on that AI front. So I thought that was a very, very interesting word choice.
Is it my turn?
Okay.
So because I'm a policy creature, these are all policy outcomes. But I think, SeedAI can tell the story of AI such that in 10 years, things like opening up in a privacy-respecting way government data sets to build AI for the private sector is not controversial. Funding for STEM and AI education, especially in underrepresented communities, is not controversial. Government contracting, right, plays a big role in the private sector. Incentivizing government contracts to go to innovative, responsible, and diverse and equitable AI projects feels like a good policy goal. So things that right now feel like an uphill battle, I think SeedAI in 10 years can make that stuff obvious, and maybe we'll even take it for granted.
I really like both those answers. I don't know if it's something to add. I'll be that guy. I think the practical implementation of that might look like regular education sessions. That there's the SeedAI like grant foundation making these investments. There's a whole team running educational sessions. I think there's more events like this of connecting those that are building with those that are regulating and just determining like what the future looks like. But I'll echo what Leo and Thomas picked up on, which is there's a sense of fear around newness and new technologies, AI being sort of the forefront one. And there's a great opportunity here to expose all the positivity and the amazing things that come from life being more engaging and more efficient. And I'm really looking forward to SeedAI being able to tell and highlight those stories.
Okay, I actually want to turn it over to the. Am I allowed to do this, Austin? I'm going to turn it over to the audience. I think I'm going to do it. We're going to do it. Amazing. Do folks have any questions for this group? Incredible. Well, in that case, I'm going to turn it back over to Austin again. Thank you all for this group here. It has been so much fun to see you in person. I saw them over Zoom, so it's always more fun to see people in person as well. So, Austin, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Guys, loved it. Great panel. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys. It's awesome. Well, look, I want to thank everybody for being here today, and Leo for just being a beautiful human. Love it. But this has been a great day, and it's been really substantive. There's been a lot of good discussion, and honestly, like, I've learned a lot of things, which is really what you could hope from anything that you organize, I think. But I appreciate your trust in me, and I do want to say, to the point of being comfortable in the idea of like artificial intelligence seamlessly interacting with your life, and yet all the negative externalities that we've talked about before that, like, that really is the goal, is to engage with people who are going to understand what those negative externalities are and understand how to approach them. Because there is an outcome where it's like that, right? Like, there transparently is some outcome where we get there. And I feel like, you know, one of my mottos coming into this has been Kobayashi Maru, right? Like, there's just a weird sidelong way to crack through some of these issues. Anyways, I appreciate all of your perspectives. I appreciate you being here. Hopefully you guys are all ready for a reception. Parting words, anybody?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here.